Welcome to This Explainer. You know, we make agreements literally every single day. But today, we're going to do something really fascinating. We're taking the dense, strictly worded statutes of the Indian Contract Act of 1872, and we're translating them into practical, everyday concepts that actually protect you in the real world. Because honestly, understanding the legal anatomy of your agreements, it's an absolute superpower.
So let me ask you a simple question. Think about those casual agreements you make. Maybe you agreed to sell your old phone to a buddy, or you promised to pay someone for fixing your sink. Does that simple handshake or that quick verbal, "yeah, sure," actually hold up in a court of law? Like, what actually transforms a casual promise into an ironclad, legally binding contract?
Well, to figure that out, here is our roadmap. We're going to start with the basics of valid contracts, then figure out exactly who can sign one. We'll dive into the strict rules for minors, unpack what free consent really means, and then look at the villains of contract law: coercion, undue influence, fraud, and misrepresentation. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the basics of valid contracts.
Think of Section 10 of the Indian Contract Act as your ultimate legal checklist. For an agreement to become a true contract, it has to check some very specific boxes. You need competent parties, you need free consent, a lawful consideration, meaning something of value is exchanged, a lawful object, and the agreement can't be something the law has expressly declared void. If you're missing even one of these ingredients, you don't have a legally enforceable contract.
Moving on to Section 2. Who can actually sign a contract?
Under Section 11, the law draws a hard, unyielding line in the sand between those who are competent to contract and those who are disqualified. To be competent, you got to be the age of majority, you have to be of sound mind, and you can't be disqualified by any other law. On the flip side, the law explicitly disqualifies minors, persons of unsound mind, foreign sovereigns, alien enemies, and convicts. They literally cannot sign on the dotted line.
Now, what exactly does it mean to have a sound mind? Section 12 breaks this down into two requirements. You have to be capable of understanding the contract, and you must be able to form a rational judgment about how it affects your interests. And here's the really crucial part. A sound mind isn't a permanent lifelong label. It's entirely about your headspace at the exact second you make the contract. For example, a patient in an asylum who occasionally has lucid intervals, they can perfectly legally enter into a contract during those sound moments. Conversely, a completely sane person who is delirious with a high fever or so incredibly drunk they don't know what they're doing, they cannot legally contract in that state.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rules for minors.
In India, governed by the Indian Majority Act of 1875, the magic number is strictly 18 years. The law is incredibly precise here, guys. Being even one single day short of your 18th birthday means you are legally a minor, and that changes absolutely everything about your ability to contract.
And this leads us to a massively important legal precedent. Way back in the 1903 landmark case of Morhoy Bibi versus Darmodaskos, a minor named Mr. D mortgaged his house to a moneylender to get a loan. When it went to court, the judge ruled the contract was void ab initio. That's a Latin term meaning void from the absolute beginning. Because he was a minor, legally the agreement never existed, so Mr. D wasn't liable to repay a single rupee to that lender.
The law basically places this impenetrable protective bubble around minors. Just look at this breakdown. Minors can be a beneficiary of a contract, like they can't be a full partner in a business, but they can be admitted to the benefits of that partnership. They can act as an agent, and they can always plead minority as a defense, even if they lied about their age to get a loan. But look at what they cannot do. They can't ratify a childhood contract once they turn 18, they can never be declared insolvent, and they absolutely cannot bind their parents to a contract without express authority.
Now, there is one major exception you need to know about: the liability for necessaries. If you supply a minor with goods that are reasonably necessary for their support, think food or education, the law does allow you to be reimbursed. But, and this is a huge but, there is zero personal liability for the minor. Let's say Shruti, a minor, buys a 70,000 rupee laptop for her online classes on credit, but she only has 20,000 rupees in total assets. The shopkeeper can only recover that 20,000. Her property is liable, sure, but Shruti herself, she is completely off the hook for the rest.
Okay, Section 4. What is free consent?
Because here's the thing. Just because you have the capacity and you signed a document doesn't mean you actually agreed to it. Under Section 14, consent is only considered free if it wasn't caused by one of these 5 elements. I like to call these the 5 villains of contract law: coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and mistake. If any of those first 4 villains crash the party, the contract becomes voidable. That means the victim gets all the power. They get to decide whether to cancel the contract entirely or go ahead and keep it.
Let's look at the first 2 villains. Section 5, coercion and undue influence.
People mix these up all the time, but they operate in totally different ways. Coercion is aggressive, physical, and illegal. It's about committing or threatening acts forbidden by the Indian Penal Code, or holding someone's property hostage to force an agreement. Undue influence? That is purely psychological manipulation. It requires a pre-existing relationship where one person holds power over the other and uses that power to dominate their will and score an unfair advantage.
Let's look at a pretty dark but perfect example of coercion. Imagine a husband trying to get a property release deed signed. To force his wife and son to do it, he threatens to commit suicide. Now, obviously a dead man can't be punished, but attempting suicide is an act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code. So, using that threat to force a signature, that is pure coercion. The contract is immediately voidable.
Now contrast that with undue influence. Picture a spiritual guru who leverages their intense relationship of trust with a vulnerable devotee to get them to gift over their entire life savings in return for salvation. There's no physical threat happening here, but the guru is dominating the devotee's will, using a fiduciary relationship to secure an unconscionable bargain. The law sees that unfair advantage, and it will let that agreement be set aside.
And finally, Section 6, fraud and misrepresentation.
According to Section 17, the anatomy of fraud is all about deliberate intent. This is when someone is actively trying to cheat you. Maybe they suggest a fact is true when they absolutely know it's a lie, or they actively cover up a crucial flaw. Or maybe they make a promise with zero intention of ever actually keeping it. Fraud means they want to deceive you, and they trick you into acting on that lie, causing you to take a loss.
This actually leads to a really brilliant question. Can just keeping your mouth shut amount to fraud? Interestingly, usually, no. Mere silence isn't fraud, but there are exceptions. Silence is fraud if you have a specific legal duty to speak up, or if your silence is basically the equivalent of speaking. Like if someone wants to buy your horse and says, hey, if you don't deny it, I'll assume the horse is healthy, and you say absolutely nothing, knowing full well the horse is sick? Yeah, your silence just became a fraudulent statement.
So what actually separates fraud from misrepresentation? It all boils down to one word: intent. Like we just saw, fraud is intentional deception meant to cheat someone. Misrepresentation, though, it's an honest mistake. It's when you pass on secondhand info that you genuinely believe is true. You make a positive statement about it, but it turns out to be totally false. You didn't mean to deceive anyone, but you still misled them, which means their consent wasn't truly free.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really remember these foundational legal concepts. They aren't just dry textbook statutes. They are vital, everyday shields designed to protect you from unconscionable bargains and deceptive practices. The next time you get ready to sign on the dotted line, keep this front of mind and ask yourself, do all the parties involved truly have the legal capacity, and is everyone's consent genuinely legally free? Thanks for learning with me today, and keep asking the right questions.